This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Well, a Merry Christmas, one and all. He abandoned us last week. He didn't really abandon us. We was just scheduling stuff. But he's here. He's on the road doing radio because he's that committed to the cause of Right to Life Radio. John Girardi here from Right to Life of Central California. And joining me as he's driving, what California highway or byway are you driving on right now, Mr. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council?
I am on, John, arguably the best of the Southern California, the three big freeways, at least when you were coming from Fresno down to Southern California.
Okay.
The worst is probably the 405. The second worst is the 5. But the 210 is just not horrible. I mean, it's not great, but it's not horrible.
So this calls to mind two things. First is the SNL skit, The Californians, where I'm now wanting to ask, so did you take the 210 to the 5? You'll take to the 99 all the way to Fresno. Also, my wife is probably cringing if she listens to the show, just because you and I, as California natives, refer to all of our freeways as the 210, the 5, the 405. And I think my wife still finds such naming conventions for freeway, the 41, the 168, the 99.
You don't need a definite article.
She's like, why are you saying the? That this makes no sense. And I'm like, no, you don't make sense.
These freeways, John,
wrong.
in California, they identify their pronouns are the.
Yeah.
That is a definite article you must use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how they identify. It's on their birth certificate. Yeah. All right. So Jonathan is driving around hither and yon, and I want to talk.
But John,
yes, go for it.
I do actually have one thing that I want to do at the top of the show.
Okay.
I want to give a shout out to a listener, because I got contacted today or a couple days ago by a listener from your past and my past. Someone who says, even though he and his wife now live in the far-flung state of Indiana, he listens, I should say, to Right to Life Radio. And he said, yeah, I'm sorry I don't keep in touch very much, but I love listening to you and John on Right to Life Radio.
Oh, my gosh.
That is our old buddy, Miles Carmody.
Miles. Oh, boy. Oh, my gosh. I love Miles. Wow. He and his wife are out in Indiana. That's wonderful. Yeah, actually, I got an email. Speaking of Indiana listeners, and apparently we're big in Indiana. I have a gal from some county in, I think it was, which county in Indiana was this? Okay, her name is Sue Gentry, and Sue is the head of a regional pro-life organization in Indiana. And she's from Boone County Right to Life in Lebanon, Indiana.
Aww.
So there you go. Susan, thank you so much for listening. You're right. Susan was saying that we don't shout out Indiana enough for doing good pro-life stuff. And she's right. And I need to give Indiana more love as an adoptive son of the great state of Indiana, given that I was at Notre Dame for 7 years. So Susan Gentry, if you're listening, Miles Carmody, if you're listening, we love you. So all right, there you go. We're big in Indiana.
Maybe one of these days, John, we can go do a live taping somewhere in Indiana. We can go to South Bend, since I've never been.
We'll go to Notre Dame.
And we can
Yeah. I'll carve out a corner over at Fiddler's Hearth or some other Irish tavern, and then we'll do it from there. All right. Let's get into the topic of the day. And for the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of online discussion about the topic of the infertility industry, as more and more people are referring to it. And we've talked about it a bit on the show. We've talked about in vitro fertilization and the rising practice of surrogacy, basically renting the bodies of women to bear children, and the many ethical problems that are associated with this, and especially with IVF. And I read a piece that kind of bowled me over with this to such an extent that it's almost shaking my whole kind of conception of what is important in the life debates. And basically, I feel like we need to start talking about the infertility industry and the destruction of life that results from the infertility industry a whole heck of a lot more. So this comes from a piece in the American Spectator written by Ellie Gardy. And she's talking about Shane Dawson and Ryland Adams. Now, those of you who were on YouTube a lot in 2005, 6, when YouTube first started and first started being a thing, might remember Shane Dawson. He was a very popular YouTuber very early on in kind of about 2010-ish. He was sort of a comedy YouTuber, and he was kind of odd. More than kind of odd, as I'm looking at producer Colton, and he's laughing and nodding. He, I think, got in trouble for some kind of over-the-top racial humor, unless I'm mistaken. I think he appeared in blackface. Maybe I might be completely making this up. Producer Colton will fact check this. At any rate, Shane Dawson was a very popular YouTuber. Comes out as gay. He has a marriage to a man named Ryland Adams. And there's been some stuff in the news about the two of them having a baby. Well, one of them, I guess, had a baby. They hired a surrogate to have their baby for them. And it's part of this rising trend of celebrities, especially gay male celebrities, hiring a surrogate to have a baby for them, and obviously using the in vitro process. Colton has confirmed to me I was correct that Shane Dawson did a bunch of blackface YouTube comedy skits. So there you go. Check one. John Girardi correct. All right. In this piece, though, about the two of them using IVF and hiring a surrogate to have their baby, also there was a lot of sort of questionable comments from Shane Dawson's past of sort of, frankly, like, this person I don't think would ever be legally allowed to adopt someone because of a lot of public comments. Certain public comments he had made in the past joking about pedophilia and joking about it joking that it was hot, and other sort of extremely questionable stuff that I think in a normal adoption process would have been a red flag. But because the in vitro process is almost completely unregulated, because egg donation is totally unregulated, because all of this stuff is so unregulated, here these guys able to buy a baby. Now, Shane, in this piece, there is a discussion about the numbers of basically babies who did not make it in the course of their specific process of having a baby. Basically, they were joking about the fact that 10 embryos didn't make it. So this is one of the major ethical problems in IVF, is that you have to create more embryos than can possibly survive. And this led to me reading this part of the piece, just completely bowled me over. I know Jonathan has thoughts on this. I have thoughts on this.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what they write is nearly 12 to 15 embryos are typically produced in each in vitro treatment. E. Christian Brugger, a writer for the National Catholic Register, recently calculated that this conservatively means that more than 2.5 million human beings were either killed or frozen in a single year in our country to fuel this sordid industry.
Okay, John.
Fertility clinics. Let me read this last sentence. Fertility clinics, Brugger concluded, quote, are places of unspeakable evil, arguably worse than abortion facilities. Okay, so Jonathan, the floor is yours. This bowled me over because the number of actual abortions that happens in the United States is like 900,000. We're talking about
Right.
through IVF clinics, 2.5 million children are created only to be destroyed or put in a freezer every single year. That number stunned me. I lead a pro-life organization. I didn't know this. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
That number is dramatically higher than I would have expected as well. The thing that I've always heard in the past, roughly speaking, when you hear people talk about the number of embryos that are on ice, these so-called, kind of snowflake babies that were created and that are excess children, and they are waiting in fertility clinics around the country because their parents created them, and either they are waiting to decide if they're going to implant them, or they're definitely not going to implant them, but they're trying to decide if they're going to donate them to science or donate them to someone else. The number that I remember hearing a while ago was around 400 to 600,000 total of these embryos that were possibly eligible for adoption around the country. And John, now that you say that, I'm suddenly realizing, I guess that number was 10 years ago, probably at least, that I first heard that number.
Well, the number's not going to get smaller. The number's not going to get smaller, I guarantee. I'm sure the number of frozen embryos gets added to much more than taken away. I mean, there are more new frozen embryos being created than there are frozen embryos being given for adoption. So, I mean, that number's got to be climbing every single year.
Well, and on top of that number I remember from whatever it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was the cumulative number. And now you're telling me, based on this research, which I don't have any reason to disbelieve, that the number is potentially, 4 to 5 times higher, not in toto, but in 1 year.
Yeah,
like just the number that is in a single year. And John, I think it's really important just to kind of pause and walk things back a little bit, because when we're talking about this, if listeners are thinking about this, when you hear about abortion, everybody knows in the back of their head, okay, well, I guess, this is a bad situation. We don't like this. There's a mom who got pregnant because she doesn't want to be pregnant. She's not expecting that. There's a crisis situation. And isn't it a tragedy that we have these 900,000 abortions every year? But, gosh darn it, this is kind of a sad, necessary evil of living in our modern society. That's how, unfortunately, I think a lot of voters, like we saw, sadly, in the state of Ohio recently,
That's
kind of what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But you're talking about something here. I think it's really important to talk about not just the order of magnitude difference in terms of the number, but we're talking about children that did not exist, and they did not come into existence because of a whoopsie in a lab. This is not a lab accident. This is not this was indiscretion of 2 teenagers in the back seat of their dad's car.
This is a deliberate choice to create a bunch of human beings knowing that you're either going to destroy them or indefinitely freeze them. And that is, I agree with you, Jonathan, as we head into the break here, that's it's orders of magnitude terrible. When we return, why this phenomenon could just continue to increase with potential California laws to mandate coverage for IVF. That is next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, a Merry Christmas to you and yours as Jonathan Keller joins us through the miracle of, what application are we using to pipe Jonathan in here, Producer Cole? It's just purely a phone call? Okay, I was going to say through the miracle of Skype or the miracle of FaceTime or something. But no, just purely a phone call. Jonathan Keller joining us here on Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan. Now, we've been talking about IVF and this stunning figure, this estimate from the National Catholic Register, and it's basically looking at, a typical in vitro process involves the creation of about 12 to 15 embryos. most of whom are not going to actually be implanted or come to birth. Most of these embryos will either be frozen or destroyed. So E. Christian Brugger, who's a writer at National Catholic Register, calculated that conservatively, this means that there are about 2.5 million children per year who are either destroyed or put into a freezer as a result of IVF. So now, I think IVF, though, is only going to grow, and Jonathan can talk about the threats coming from California state laws about how this practice could grow.
Yeah, that's right, John. There was a bill that was introduced earlier this year by, I believe, it was Senator Carolyn Menjivar, I believe is her name. And if I'm remembering the number right, I think it was SB 729.
Okay.
And this bill, it kind of flows on the heels of some similar legislation we've seen California try to pass in recent years. And now we're even starting to see that, the Biden HHS department is talking about similar types of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what it is saying is that a lot of this, John, is connected with the idea of equity,
mm-hmm.
and saying that it's basically critical theory as applied to baby making.
Right.
And it's the idea that if, hey, look, it seems very unfair that we have in our society today, we have one type of quote unquote marital union, sexual activity that by God's good grace and design will produce children naturally,
mm-hmm.
Sometimes even when you are not expecting it to or not even wanting it to.
Right.
Then there is another type of quote unquote marital union, and I think you and I would argue, along with Orthodox Christians for the last 2,000 years, that this isn't actually a marital union for this very reason, but that's another topic. But we'll just say there's another type of sexual activity between legally married people that if it's two men or two women, that is always going to be infertile and sterile. There's never going to be a child that is produced through that union. And instead of looking more deeply at the fundamentals of natural law and the reality of biology,
right?
California and other, social justice warriors are saying, it's really unfair that biology is conspiring to deny us the ability to become parents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really also unfair that, if you are an opposite sex couple, a heterosexual couple,
mm-hmm.
You might be able to have some sort of infertility treatment covered by your insurance.
Right.
Well, we should make sure that same-sex couples are afforded those exact same procreational rights that any heterosexual couple are. So this bill, SB 729, and some of the other bills we've seen nationally,
mm-hmm.
essentially would mandate that insurance companies begin to cover reproductive technologies, reproductive services for every couple. If they're going to cover some sort of infertility treatment or service for heterosexual couples, they have to cover it for homosexual couples.
Right. Well, and it's basically it would start to take in vitro, which has always been not covered by insurance. In vitro has always been outside of the realm of a basic healthcare service that has to be covered by insurance. It's always been cash pay. And basically, that is something that that a state government can do, is regulate their insurance industry, regulate the health insurance industry in order to mandate coverage for certain kinds of things in insurance plans all throughout the state. And California has very aggressively done this with regards to abortion. They've mandated that abortion be covered as a basic essential healthcare service. This also, we'll talk about it later, but this gets into the question of, is abortion healthcare, is in vitro healthcare? In vitro is not correcting actually something wrong with the body. It's not, in vitro is not, even for an opposite sex couple, in vitro is not actually correcting whatever infertility problem the couple may be experiencing. It's completely bypassing it. So to call it healthcare is much like with abortion, I think, a misnomer. So the idea has been, for the sake of, as you're saying, Jonathan, LGBT equity, the idea has been to mandate in vitro coverage as a basic covered service for insurance plans and in Medi-Cal. Now, so far that hasn't passed. And I mean, Jonathan, you can, for the 3 minutes we have here, I think you could speak to it a little better. Thankfully, I think it costs so much, and probably the insurance lobby still has a big enough lobby that this is not going to get covered. But it seems like we're heading in that direction.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And John, I think that the financial aspect is really one of the only ways that it's the only break that we've seen so far on this.
Yeah.
But I will say, don't get too excited yet, because in the hearings for this bill, we actually had Dr. Akilah Weber, who is an assembly member, she's an OBGYN. She's a very aggressively pro-abortion assembly member in the legislature here in California. And when she was testifying on this bill, she was actually opposed to it. But the reason she said she was opposed to it, John, was not because of the financial cost.
Yeah. It
was not because of the issues of, denying the basic created reality of natural law and natural order. She does not go far enough. And she said, I'm concerned about not just the sexual orientation or gender identity equity argument. I'm concerned about the racial and economic equity arguments. And what are you going to do for many of my constituents who are African American or other people of color? What about them who want to get pregnant and can't afford it because their insurance isn't very good?
Oh, so basically
her concern was that it was even more expansive, that it did provide this service and this type of these infertility IVF treatments to an even wider swath of people. And,
right. Exactly.
And John, as you mentioned, the number of people that are already using this, when we're talking about $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a pop to do IVF treatments, if it is covered by insurance moving forward, I mean, Katie, bar the door.
Yeah, I mean the numbers are just going to explode if it gets covered by Medi-Cal, if it is mandated to get covered by insurance. It's going to completely explode. Now, we're going to talk about this a little more after the break, and we're going to discuss the idea of viewing children as gifts versus as individuals to be treasured, as opposed to commodities. And we will discuss that, dig into that idea more right after the break. This is Right to Life Radio, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. Back with Right to Life Radio, we're talking about the disturbing trend of the growth of in vitro fertilization, the efforts to expand it through insurance coverage. Jonathan was talking about a bill that thankfully failed this year in the California legislature, but it seems that we're marching in this direction to mandate in vitro fertilization be covered for insurance plans all throughout the state of California. In vitro fertilization results in approximately, these are new stats that I had not heard before, and Jonathan and I are sort of bowled over by this, of approximately 2.5 million embryos every year are created via IVF who are not going to be born. They're either going to be destroyed or put in a freezer. And this just is such an astonishing number that's happening. And this is happening in Texas. This is happening in all these states that have outlawed abortion. This is still happening. Now, I want to maybe talk about the question of IVF and the question and I want to get to the fundamental truths of all of this. And we're going to be a little bit philosophizing here on Right to Life Radio. So, Jonathan, if I'm using big fancy words, feel free to stop me. And so I want to talk a little bit about IVF and talk about sort of the fundamental problems with it. There's obviously this main obvious first problem of wastage, that you're creating more human beings than can ever be born. So you're creating human beings. As Jonathan pointed out, this is not a fit of passion or, youthful indiscretion resulting in the creation of a child when in the creation of a child. This is a very deliberate act of putting egg cells and sperm cells together in a dish to create new human organisms, knowing that you're not going to have most of them survive. And so obviously the wastage, the destruction of life is bad. But I think at the root of this is a sort of philosophical problem of not thinking about embryos, not thinking about children even, maybe more broadly, not thinking about them as entities to be valued in and of themselves, but as commodities to sort of ornament the lives of adults.
Right.
Leon Kass, who I read a good bit of his work. So Leon Kass was the first chairman of President Bush's Bioethics Council, and a great physician and moral philosopher and ethicist. And one of the things he talked about, that he would talk about with bioethics in general, but specifically with reference to different kinds of reproductive technologies, is the idea of thinking of human beings, thinking of children as gifts. And the idea that children are not things that are owed to it. The very nature of a gift is that it's something someone doesn't have to give it to you. It's something freely given. It's not, a contract. It's not, I pay you $20 and you mow my lawn. A gift is something freely given without necessitating anything in exchange. It's gratuitous. And we, I think, have gotten to this point with children where, and I'm not saying this is necessarily conscious for people who choose IVF. I think a lot of people choose IVF out of, deep desperation of genuinely wanting a child and wanting to find some way to have a child. I'm not condemning people for this, but you can start to see this for, okay, here is Kim Kardashian renting another woman's womb, creating children in a petri dish, several of whom are not going to make it, to have a baby via IVF because she doesn't want to carry the baby. She wants to hire someone else to carry the baby. Here are gay couples like Shane Dawson and his legal husband, Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, his legal husband, hiring a woman's womb, buying an egg from someone, and having a baby through this technological manipulation to have a baby because they want to have a baby. It's not something that comes to you as a gift, as something that you cannot, when children are produced in the normal course of things, it's not always something you can control. It is something that comes to you, arrives to you. You don't even, I think, need to talk about it religiously, but it's not coming to you through necessarily through a conscious, 100% certain choice. It's a gift, and one that you received, and that hopefully allows you to treasure and value the gift, to value the gift of this new human life that isn't just an ornament to your personality, but someone that you receive and love and treasure. So, Jonathan, I know I've been ranting, and Jonathan joining us via telephone, so it's hard to do the same give and take that we do in the studio. But I just find it sort of horrific to see the extent to which we are so not viewing children as gifts that we're okay with having one child and in the process throwing into a garbage can or throwing into a freezer, 10 or 11 of his or her siblings.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, John, I agree with you. And one of the two of the people that I'll say online that I would suggest our listeners go and look up, if you go on Twitter or X, as it is now called, there's two really good anti-IVF, anti-surrogacy advocates that are out there. One of them is Jennifer Lahl, Lahl. You can just search for Jennifer Lahl and you can see a bunch of the work she's done. She was part of a documentary a few years ago called Eggs Exploitation,
There we go.
which was really good. Another one who's very good is a woman named Katie Faust. And she's the founder of an organization called Them Before Us. And it's essentially talking about children's rights and not necessarily children's rights to, not in the way that the left talks about children's rights, like the rights to keep secrets from their parents or the rights to choose to emancipate themselves if they don't like the biology that they were born into. But really basic rights, as in children have a right to, this is her pinned tweet, children have a right to life, to their mother and father, to sexual innocence, and to intact bodies. And I think that is, it's something, John, that I think, as you said, it used to be that part of the reason that marriage existed, I mean, yes, you can talk about it spiritually, that marriage is a picture between Christ and the church, and that's true. But in a practical sense, when it comes to human civilization, marriage was primarily designed and it functioned because you need some sort of boundary for sexual activity, because sexual activity generally produces children, and the government has a compelling interest, to use legalese, even though I'm not an attorney. There is a compelling government interest in protecting the future citizens of a nation and a society.
And ensuring that they grow up in the best environment, which is with their biological male father and their biological female mother, or whatever is the best, sort of barring that, if that's not possible, the next best thing that we can get. So, an adoptive family taking in a child who maybe the parents are in a train wreck, some sort of difficult situation, a train wreck situation. The idea of marriage is for children, and it is about safeguarding the rights of children. And I think, hearing you talk about all this, Jonathan, makes me think that our weakened conception of marriage is what's leading to the commodification of children. Marriage is about children. It's about a stable environment for creating and raising children. I think between, the widespread, and maybe it's sort of between the widespread acceptance of contraception on the one hand and the and the advent of same-sex unions and things, we've lost sight of what marriage is all about. If marriage is just about throwing a party and a legal contract between adults, you don't need a marriage to do that. The government doesn't have much of an interest in how fun of a party two adults have. And if two adults want to make an arrangement for sharing their stuff, exchanging legal possession and ownership over stuff, they can do that. The government cared about marriage because it was a stable environment for creating and rearing children. So it's that losing that and thinking that marriage is just about adults having fun, adults exchanging agreements, I think has led to looking at children not as the natural fruit of marriage, something you gratefully received as a consequence of marriage, but as ornaments. If marriage is about adults feeling good about themselves, then maybe that's what kids are about too.
Well, that's right. And one thing, John, that I'll say that my friend Katie Faust, if you go online again, she's written several books about this, and she's written several great, lots of tweets on her page about this. Katie, if you go on her Twitter page,
it's Katie Katy Faust. I realized that. So Katie Faust.
That's right. Essentially, it's exactly what you said, John. I'm paraphrasing it because I'm driving, so I won't look up and quote her tweets. But one of the things that she consistently says when I've seen her speak is that children are not, like you said ornaments, which, given it's Christmas time, that's a good phrase to use. But children are not baubles or little decorations that you put onto the Christmas tree of your life in order to make it look prettier and to make your friends or family go, oh, what a beautiful arrangement you have. Look at this nice family that you have created of your own will and of your own accord. Isn't that so nice?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what children are for.
Right.
Children are their own are individual human beings with their own rights to live in a family. I mean, of course, we realize that there is difficulty and there is trauma sometimes that leads to the loss of either one or both parents. I mean, some cases the parents die. Sometimes the parents are unfit, and there tragically has to be a situation where kids do not grow up with either or both of their mother or father. Mm-hmm. But the idea that
we have
society would now begin to say we're going to create an industry that orphans children on an industrial scale, is really grotesque and horrifying.
Right. We have to affirm that there is an objective normative ideal towards which we have to do everything possible to work, and that children have a right to that normative ideal, and we have to do what we can. Every situation is different, but we have to do everything we can to afford children that ideal. So anyway, I think this is a deeper discussion, but it's having enormous ramifications for society. We'll be back with closing thoughts here on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, Jonathan Keller, John Girardi. Jonathan, this is our second to last episode of the year. This is airing on December 23rd. So, Jonathan, I give you 30 seconds to wish our listeners a Merry Christmas. I'm going to be Scrooge with it. 30 seconds. Go.
All right. Well, despite you setting me up perfectly, I will not sing We Wish You a Merry Christmas, because I know that would probably come across poorly across the phone. But I will just say it's a pleasure. Try. It's a pleasure and a joy to get to co-host the show with you, John. And I'm grateful for the work of Right to Life Central California and the Obria Group. Grateful for producer Colton making us sound better than we deserve. And I am honored to get to host radio alongside you, my good buddy. And God bless all our listeners. And in the words of Tiny Tim, God bless us, everyone.
Agreed. And a Merry Christmas to all of our listeners. I also wanted, just as a closing Christmas thing, Jonathan is celebrating his 10th year as a CEO of California Family Council. So I want all of our radio listeners to stop what they're doing in their cars and give a round of applause for our good buddy Jonathan Keller and the great work he does at CFC and his great work as co-host of this fine radio program. So way to go, Jonathan. And a Merry Christmas to you and yours. And as we close out the year, obviously this show, we try to have fun with, we were talking about this with the last episode, producer Colton and I, that, we try to have fun with a really dark and horrible topic. And, I think in this season, above all, as we reflect upon God becoming an unborn child and then being born into this world, and hallowing the space of the womb, I think it's something for all of us to reflect upon and to pray for all those mothers, all those children who are facing difficulties and challenges, and to pray for peace and the peace that comes from a right-ordered society, for an end to abortion in our country. So Merry Christmas to you and yours. Thank you so much. This has been John Girardi from Right to Life of Central California.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a Happy New Year.
Okay. We might have to cut that out.
Oh no, come on. That was my specific request.
You requested it, Jonathan.
I had a really sweet, nice ending, and then you guys had gunshots.